Happy Wednesday, everyone, and welcome back, Jack. Thank you, as always, for joining us. We got another episode of the Glute series this morning, and today we're going to be going through the 3 things that you're currently doing which you probably shouldn't, or could be optimizing for better results. But before we do, we're going to go to Jack for the usual, see what he's been up to this week, what he's excited about. Hopefully we can rein him in this week, but we'll see. Jack, hand it over to you. What have you been up to?
Mate, mine's been about the gaining phase. I did a little weigh-in this week, checked in how things have been going. I'm not someone who does really regular weigh-ins because I become a bit too myopic on it, a bit too focused on it. So as we would do with a client, if that's the case and it's not something that works, then we'd look at other measures. Yeah. I do a lot of progress pictures and stuff instead and look at strength measurements. But I did a little check-in and I thought I'll see how I'm going, and I am 11 and a half weeks through and 4 kilos up. So that's nice. 8.8 pounds. And I was happy with that. That was great. That was more than I expected because I'm a very gradual gainer, even though I've been absolutely smashing back the food.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was pleased. And I'm also pleased that I had held off on weighing myself, I'm pleased that I left it a certain amount of time and was just kind of checking in periodically, and instead going by progress pictures and stuff because everything was looking good in that sense. I don't think I've gained a lot of body fat, obviously some with that sort of gain in that amount of time, but not a disproportionate amount. So I was pleased to see that weight's come up nicely as well.
Definitely. Just for the listeners then, how often do you weigh in at the moment? What is that? Is it a correlational for anything, or is it just periodically random?
Roughly monthly. And I don't even put too much value in those constantly because I'm not doing it frequent enough to compare them up against each other. Yeah. It's more of if I check in a month later and I'm still the exact same weight, I'm worried, or I'm either worried or I'm looking straight back to the other variables of, okay, what's been going on in my progress pictures, what's going on with my strength, and kind of meticulously comparing that up against other stuff as well to make sure that at least something's going in the right direction. But I just don't use weight as my main measure of progress.
You adapt really quickly, don't you, metabolically? So for you, I guess it can be quite frustrating if you were to track weight because you're almost looking down and going, shit, this isn't really moving, and you're eating more and more and more and more and more. So I guess for you, even if you weren't kind of myopic about it and, it gets in your head, it would be anyone, because at that point where, your strength might be going through the roof, your progress pictures might be looking better, but if that one measurement's not shifting and it's something that you tend to focus on more, and I think we do purely because it's far more visual, it's really simple to see, you've either gained or you haven't, whereas progress pictures, you're kind of like, is there anything going on here? I can totally see why that is. And I guess that kind of tunes in a little bit to that for you.
It becomes almost demotivating because you're like, I'm upping food, I'm doing all these things right. How much further have I got to take this thing? I get to a point where I'm at 450, 500 grams of carbs. I'm at 80, 90 grams of fat. And I'm like, and still weight's not shifting or something. And I'm like, well, how much further can I go? And it's not really that. It will kick in at some point. I will start to trickle body fat up and trickle body weight up and muscle as well, kind of gradually, especially when I'm pushing things in the gym. But I think if I'm constantly focused on it every morning, or you suddenly wake up a little bit dehydrated and I'm immediately down a pound or 2, to me, I'm like, man, when's this gonna kick in? I just know it's not the right thing for my mentality. So like we'd do with a client, as we say, we'd look at other measures, we'd look at things that they do feel motivated by, things that do actually spur them on to go on and do more, and then just have maybe little touch points further down the line with where are things at now. But yeah, I'm happy with it, man. I'm excited with it.
Really good.
So it's still going to be a solid, I'll probably do at least another 3 to 4 kind of bulking cycles. So I'm in up to sort of 12 weeks now. That's a standard sort of meso cycle. I'll probably do it up towards a year total. So another 3 or 4 of those. See how juicy we can get.
Getting that struggling through the door physique. The people who are listening, and I think there is a huge kind of nature of, I'll add that, and I'll add that, and I'll add that, and I'll add that. But they don't necessarily strip away the things that they are doing, which maybe they shouldn't be doing. And I say shouldn't, not as in any exercise is particularly terrible and you're going to, ruin everything by doing it. But there are certainly some things when it comes to glute training that I think especially that we'll both see and hopefully we'll get to during this, that actually aren't necessarily optimizing your progress and potentially even holding you back. So I think it'd be great if we could discuss those. We'll touch on 3 main points. And before we do that, I think something we're both quite keen maybe to discuss will be, what are the potential holdbacks or things that we would maybe, if we're in a gym or we see on social media, when it comes to actually looking at certain form or someone's programming, that we might be kind of apprehensive to comment on, maybe, because it's not an easy thing to do, is it? It's something which I think you do once or twice and then you're like, do I, don't I? What are your thoughts?
I've had positive and negative experiences with this, but I would err more on the side of negative than not. I think people generally don't take feedback too well, even if you are presenting it in very much like a kind of hedged way, like you're being very polite about it and you're even saying up front, I'm not digging on your workouts, I'm hoping I can help with this here. My experiences with it tend to be, you get quite a bit of pushback, and there's a real want to help and to kind of share what you've learned. Because for me personally, I'm like, with the amount of time I've spent learning about movements, learning about different exercises, I wish I had someone come along and tell me this at the start. But then it's difficult when you get that pushback and you almost then have been burned by that experience. And the same goes for nutrition as well. I've had experiences with that, with trying to talk to people about that. I guess this could even link into what one of the first things is that we might say a lot of people do wrong, which is, I would say, not staying open to being incorrect about something, or not staying open to like learning new things once you get to a certain level. You know, it can even just be as simple as people thinking, right, I can hip thrust now, and I've progressively overloaded my hip thrust. Therefore, I'm cool. I know how to do it. Whereas actually, there's going to be form things that come out that someone could point out for you. There's going to be new research that shows better engagement with certain placements of your feet or your knees or whatever it is that you're doing. There's going to be all these things that can always optimize and always improve. And I think as humans, there's a little bit of a tendency of, once you get to a certain level, be like people say, yeah, if someone's doing something that we would deem incorrect, but they look great, they're like, oh, well, they look like that now, so what's the problem? It's like, yeah, but they could look even better, right? It's not thinking about, sometimes people achieve things in spite of what they're doing, and we definitely see this a lot with Instagram, rather than because of what they're doing. And so I think it's really important to stay open, and maybe it helps that we're talking about this in a non-direct way. Maybe that's the thing that rubs people up the wrong way, when you're almost singling out an exercise that they're doing or something that they're doing with food or whatever. So hopefully talking about it in this way will help to be less personal and more just kind of directive as an overarching thing for people. But yeah, I think it's a thin line, really, and it's a tough one to tread.
Would we say then, if we were to mark this maybe as point 1, complacency, would that be a good word to use here? I think people get to a point where they think, oh, I've nailed this, that's fine, I'm just going to wait now, or, you know, I'll add more volume or something. But I had a really interesting conversation with somebody yesterday who said to me in an email, I'm sorry I keep sending you all these videos, it's all that beginner stuff. And I felt like saying to her, you believe it or not, the people who send me the most videos are people who are really advanced. And the reason they're really advanced is because they send me loads of videos. And it's that whole, I can always do a bit better, you know. I'd like to say I record a lot of what I do, mainly so I can call myself out on stuff. You know, I look at my videos and think, does that look good? If a client sent that to me, would I say that's the right RIR, or would I say that's good form? And sometimes I'm just like, absolutely not, that's terrible. And I'm probably harsher on myself than I would be on a client. But then I try to hold myself to the highest standard I can, because if I'm going to preach something, I need to be able to back it up with something. But I think one of the shames about this, and it's like you said, and we've said this before, with something like social media, you have some people with fantastic physiques, you know, and they'll do, I'm not going to name any names, but they'll do 5 or 6 HIIT workouts a week and then have a body, and you're thinking to yourself, either A, you just have, you know, you have fantastic genetics and generally speaking, you respond really well to what you're doing, or B, this isn't actually what you do on a day-to-day basis. What you've done is you've stuck to a really good, solid program, but to create entertainment and almost engagement, you've kind of gone down the lines more of, hey, this is what I do. Which I think...
And that, by the way, to anyone listening, as insiders in this industry, that 100% happens more frequently than you would like to think.
100%. And the thing is with that is that, you have to imagine that there's, if you look at my program, in fact, I could almost bet your bottom dollar if I looked at your program now, Jack, I would look at that. And I think a statement for it would be, and this is definitely for mine, big and boring. There's nothing flashy about my program. You wouldn't look at it and go, oh, that looks fun. But once you get stuck into it and you start to feel the levels of recovery you get, you start to feel the levels of performance enhancement you get, and then obviously the results you get off the back of that shit's fun. Looking back and going, I was here, now I'm here. That's fun to me. The actual process, I'm not saying that I go to the gym and hate my life. I'm saying I go to the gym and know why I'm going and I know why I'm doing something. Whereas I feel like with some people, it's a case of hit and hope. I saw someone do this, it must be good. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of disappointing in a way, because I'm like, oh, come on, we can do more than that. Like, it's use your time more wisely.
I think it's important to remember, I think we could sum up this whole point around how workouts look, what people actually do, etc., with the fact that an influencer's job is to get more engagement, more followers, and more likes. It's not to show you the most optimal workouts. That's the job of a physique coach. That's the job of someone who is a one-to-one coach, a group coach, whatever it is. For them, they're trying to get you the best results possible. Influencers, by their nature, and they might do this by building a better physique or whatever, they might be coaches themselves. But if they're in the business of making money through social media, more clicks, more likes, and more followers are better for them. So naturally, they're going to be talking about current workouts that other people are doing a lot. They're going to be eating the same sorts of food that everyone's speaking about. They're going to be doing stuff for clout, essentially, rather than for your optimal physique progress.
I couldn't agree with that anymore. I really couldn't. Just to circle back full whip back into the original point of kind of approaching people. You mentioned about it being difficult to approach people. And what I would say to people is try and understand, and this is something I think I know I've worked on, and Jack, I'm almost certain that you have too, is if you feel a certain emotion to something that someone has said to you, question yourself on why that emotion has been felt. Don't immediately respond and get angry at them. But if you're feeling anger about something that someone has said, what triggers that emotion? If you just take a step back and go, what he's just said to me has made me really angry. Why is that? Is that because you look back and go, shit, if he's right, I've just wasted 6 weeks of time, or I've wasted money on this program, or there's tons of reasons what you could be thinking. But if you're thinking, oh, I'm embarrassed, and my best way to do is kind of attack back, just try and take a breath and go, thank you so much. And just kind of smile, because if you smile, it's much easier to be more kind of open-minded, I think. If you're kind of almost being grateful for something that someone said, it's very hard to be very angry at the same time. Mm-hmm. And this has happened to me in the past, when people have said, oh, this is what you should have done here, or this is what you should have done here. And I immediately think, oh, what are you talking about? That's rubbish. I know better than you. And I'm thinking to myself, that is not the attitude here, because they clearly know something that you don't. And if they know that, and that's a viable piece of information from a trustworthy source, hey, I'm going to listen, because either A, I'm going to be right and my process is better, but I've learned that something else is not right for me, or B, they're going to be right and I've just benefited from something. In research, for example, the research that comes out as a positive is just as important as the stuff that comes out as a negative. So proving something works is just as important as proving something that doesn't, because it directs it in a better direction, fundamentally, doesn't it? It's not just about getting everything right. It's about actually getting things wrong, because you bounce off the two sides and it puts you somewhere in the middle.
And as a person who's receiving that sort of information, fundamentally, this comes down to identity. It's the concept of, do you have a growth mindset or do you have a fixed mindset? And these are defined terms in the scientific literature as well. It's a great book by Carol Dweck called, I think it's just called Grow. If you look up Carol Dweck book, you'll see it. And it's all about having a growth mindset versus fixed mindset. And essentially, it is that if someone says something that challenges what you think, if someone says something that you were previously incorrect in, well, happy days, because now you know something new. You know, now you're building your identity around, great, now I know something better than I previously did. Rather than if you're fixed in something and someone says something that challenges that, you're going to get defensive off the back of it because you have to protect whatever it is that you are
Yeah.
fixed around. And so just by the very nature of it, by the very definition of it, if you have a growth mindset, nothing that anyone says to challenge you can hurt you. It can only help you. Like I always like to joke around and say every day is a school day. And it really fucking is. Every day is a school day for me because there's always something that comes up that, whether it's to do with the gym, whether it's to do with nutrition, whether it's to do with work, whether it's to do with, literally could be a number of different things that I'm just looking into at the time, reading about, interested in, whatever. There's always going to be something comes up that you can learn from. And I think as long as you take that on board as, hey, now I'm actually more powerful. My ego isn't diminished by that. It's not that I've been knocked back a peg. It's actually that I've become stronger. That's the most powerful place to be.
Just to top off that point, you said for you, every day's a school day. Every day's a school day for everyone, I think, but it's whether you choose to see it as such, isn't it? You know, everyone had the opportunity to see a day like that, but it's that whole mindset shift. Do I choose to see this as something I can learn from, or do I see this as something which, I think the word was perfect, is almost attacking something I have and then I need to protect it. I think the word protect is fantastic, and that's something certainly I think a lot of us do, whether that's protecting ourselves from feeling stupid, embarrassed, or any number of things. I think that's important. So for point number 2 then, if we were to be more direct along the training lines, what kind of training things do you see? Maybe more direct towards glute training specifically. I think that's the area that has the most grey patches, I think, for me.
Yeah.
What would you say?
First one that comes to mind is order of exercises and kind of categorization of exercises. So people going in and starting off with accessory work or starting off with fluff work, you know, and this could also tie into like what people do for warm-ups and stuff. People might go in and do like a glute circuit type of thing just as like a warm-up, but what they've actually done is pre-fatigued that muscle that they're supposed to be working for the session. And pre-fatiguing, by the way, I won't go down a whole rant on this, but it's not effective as a way to build more muscle or anything. Some people like to say, I'll pre-fatigue my chest with flies and then I'll do bench press and that's better. It's not. It's been shown in scientific literature that it's worse. You just shift more of the emphasis towards your shoulders and your triceps in that example. So don't pre-fatigue yourself with a warm-up. Don't go in and start doing loads of accessory work with a band or something right before you then go in and do squats and hip thrusts and deadlifts, because your performance on those things are going to be worse. It's all about, like we always talk about warm-ups in the sense of doing the minimal amount possible to get what you want out of it. So if you want to mobilize a joint, if you want to activate a muscle, if you want to just get physiologically warm and drive blood into that area, do the absolute minimal that you can to get that done, and then move on to the stuff that's going to make a difference. Because you're never going to grow muscle from doing a warm-up. You are going to grow muscle from maximizing your compound exercises and pushing on those training sessions. And the order of exercises thing also comes in with something that we've spoken a lot about before, which is using exercise order in a session to tactically break up kind of how frequently you hit that muscle in a session. So if you're doing lower body, for example, don't go and do something that's like quad, bit of hamstrings on the end, because what you instead could do is do quads, then go and do a bit of hamstrings, and therefore your quads are getting a bit of a rest from that first exercise while you're doing the second. Then you go back in and do a little bit of quads again. Now your hamstrings are getting a bit of a rest from that second exercise, and you just move through them periodically so you aren't just accumulating too much fatigue and therefore performance is dropping off. Anything you do that is going to allow performance to stay as close to optimal as possible throughout that session is going to be better for muscle gain in the long run.
If you want to test that, it's really very easy to do. All you need to do is do these 3 things back to back. So if you're someone who does that at the moment in terms of has an exercise order that's what we would class as suboptimal, say you did squat, leg press, lunge, just as an example. measure the amount of volume you can do on all of those exercises, working as hard as you can. So total volume in a simple sense here, we're just talking about the absolute weight that you've lifted. So if you do 10 kilos on each of them, which is null and void, but and you do 10 reps for 3 sets, right? That's 300 kilos per exercise. Then on the next week, don't obviously just go around again on the same day. In the following week, break them up. So go, as Jack said, either go quad, hamstring, quad, glute, quad if you want. You can still use the 3 exercises just for shits and gigs. And you might say, well, hang on a minute, I've just slotted in 2 exercises more. I can almost guarantee you're going to do more volume for your legs. Because as Jack said, if you go quad, 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 I look at that and I feel a bit sick personally. I just think, this looks horrendous. The only time I think I would ever program like double quad would be metabolite training, which is purposefully there to drive more fluid, more pump. And that is a mechanism of hypertrophy. But it wouldn't be effective in any manner to do the opposite, because all you're doing is tiring yourself out. And in fact, would we go so far as saying that potentially that last set is junk volume, because there's surely not a great deal of stimulus there?
Gives you a nice mental break as well. I find once I've done a couple of exercises for that certain muscle group, it's actually really refreshing to then move on to something else. And then by the time you come back round to it, if you're like finishing off with some leg extensions or something, you feel renewed to get back in and do that exercise. Whereas when you've just done squats and some sort of lunge variation, you're like, I don't want to feel anything in these quads for a very long time.
Spoiler alert, I actually do, so I do my leg session, which I do on a Wednesday. So today I did back squat, stiff leg deadlift. Then I do abductions, because I always feel once I've done those 2 exercises, physically sick. I 2 exercises, I think I mentioned on a podcast a few weeks ago. My squat is something I've really started to let the chain off at the moment and go for it. And I just feel broken. And the thought of going on to any quad or any hamstring exercise after that is just null and void in my brain. I'm just like,
and things like lower back as well. Like give your lower back a little bit of a rest and hop onto something like abductions.
I find from like a mental stimulation point, once I'm in the zone of like heavy squats, I find it really effective to go on to like heavy something else, because I've got all that adrenaline. I'm really in that place. But once I've done that 3rd set of stiff leg deadlifts, I'm cooked. And it's quite nice to go and sit on the abduction machine, get a bit of a glute burn, sit there for a sec, get my life back together and crack on. And then I'll go into maybe a lunge variation, or I'll go into a hamstring isolation. But the thought of not doing that little filler exercise and going from quad hamstring back to quad hamstring, I think makes me feel a bit ill for sure. So point number 3. This will be an interesting one, I think. What are we thinking?
Do you say interesting because you think you know what I'm going to say?
I think I know what you're going to say, but I also have an interesting point myself. So it's going to be interesting either way.
Okay. I feel like this isn't going to be what you think, but tell me if it is. For me, I would go with people doing the movement rather than working the muscle. So what I mean by this is people think, right, lunges are a great example with this. People think lunges are good for my lower body, so I'm going to do a lunge, instead of thinking I'm trying to work my glutes and my quads, right? So what they do is they sling a barbell onto their back, kind of drop forward into the lunge, knees wobbling side to side as they're kind of falling down towards the floor. Their back knee twats into the floor, rebounds them back up, right? And
that is the
they get to
the explanation, by the way.
Yeah, that's the technical term, twats. And then they sling their next leg forward, rinse and repeat, and just get through a set of basically doing the movement, right? They move their body through space and time rather than actually engaging that muscle. So for me, as a contrast, how I would coach someone through a lunge is you plant that foot forwards, you take a second to steady it, make sure that your balance is there and that foot is almost like clawing into the floor.
Yeah.
If you're trying to put an emphasis on, say, glutes, then you'll have quite a nice wide stride. you'll descend down, kind of trying to keep the shin nice and vertical, putting as much weight through the heel as possible. You'll really control that movement on the way down, take a couple of seconds. And then once you just kind of touch down gently at the bottom, because you're not throwing yourself down there, then you drive that heel into the floor. You really try to imagine pushing up through the glute and flexing that lower part of the glute in order to come back up to the top, bring your foot back to the middle, step that next foot forward, pause, and go again. So there's like multiple phases to that movement where you're really engaging the muscle and doing things very intentionally. And I think that's really the only way that you're going to build muscle from those types of exercises. And it's the way that you're also going to be able to progressively overload things as well, because you're actually progressing the target muscles rather than just trying to get through 10 as quickly as you can because you think lunges are the thing to do.
So that is different to what I thought you were going to say. However, I think it ties into what I was thinking. You can correct me if I'm wrong here. So I was going along the lines of aimless exercises. So I think we've discussed this briefly before, where people kind of go, I kind of done a good session, but now I need to just finish off, do a finisher of some description. And I think that ties into what you say. Like I see loads of people doing things like quote unquote hit, jump squats, banded this, banded that. And to kind of, this is where I believe it ties into your point. I don't know if everyone really knows the direct purpose of why they're doing that. So a bit like your lunge example where you've said, if you just, flum it into the ground and then walk off and just carry on repeating that, is there any real glute work going on there? And I think, there is a direct purpose in how you coach that lunge. We're looking at certain mechanics to really access the main functions of the glute. And that has to be the idea with anything. So if you're doing loads of different exercises or loads of different things and you're not necessarily feeling the glutes working, I wouldn't do more. I would question what you're doing and is that effective? Like you said there, if I did 30 walking lunges, and my glutes weren't burning, would I go, oh, fuck it, I'll do another 30 and hope for the best? Or would I go, 30 is a pretty good amount, it's 15 per leg. Am I doing them right? And then come back to your point, how would I do them better to do my glutes? Well, I would do this, this, and this. Does that kind of make sense? Or are our points quite separate?
I do think they're separate because you could know why you're doing lunges and still execute them poorly. I think they're both valid points. I just think they're different.
Yeah.
I think my one's specifically digging on form. And I think there's a difference between, say, if you're trying to maximize strength, then the goal is the movement, right?
Yeah.
If you're a power lifter, you want to be really good at squatting, really good at deadlifting, really good at benching. They're movements. They're nothing to do with how big your back is or something. That stuff helps. That is correlated with that, but it's not the direct goal. So if your goal is building muscle mass, you have to be going at it with the frame of how do I engage my muscles optimally, not how do I go through this lunge movement, not do I tick the I did lunges today box. For yours, I think that's then almost a separate point that's really important to say, like we've said before, if you can't look through your training plan and justify every single exercise that is in there, you've got a problem. Like you have to be able to know why you're doing those movements and how they are getting you towards that goal of muscle gain.
Yeah, to bring up the first point you mentioned about movements versus muscles, a really good example for this is the difference between CrossFit and bodybuilding. You've got a CrossFit athlete and stood up next to a bodybuilder and said, right, I want you both to do as many bodyweight squats as you possibly can, and off you go. I guarantee you, not even due to energy systems, that the bodybuilder would fail way, way, way before that CrossFit athlete, because the bodybuilder is trained and tuned to make muscles work and to feel muscles work. So their quads would be on fire. Their glutes might even be on fire because they're trained to get maximum activation from the muscle through whatever pattern they're doing. Whereas a CrossFitter, the whole aim is just to get the reps done, do them. And it's, if anything, you don't want to feel it, you want to get to 50, 60 bodyweight squats and be like, this is just tiring me out. my legs don't feel anything. Because if a
And
bodybuilder,
let's also bring in what we said about how people will then say, oh, but then why are some CrossFitters really muscular? And what they do is they look to the people who are elite, like the best CrossFitters in the world, who are absolutely jacked. And if you're going to compare those people, then you have to compare them against the most elite bodybuilders in the world. And they are significantly smaller than the biggest bodybuilders in the world. So like we said earlier, it's not that what they're doing is terrible. It's that they could build a lot more muscle mass. Say those particular elite CrossFitters could be even bigger and even more muscular if they optimize their training for muscle gain, which is just, it's not their goal. It's not what they're doing.
100%. I totally agree. And if you look at the difference in the sports, you know, as you said, Jack, we're looking at bodybuilders trying to develop muscle tissue, and we're looking at CrossFitters trying to do everything except for build muscle tissue. There is no event in CrossFit where they say, let's see who's most muscular. You know, their muscles are a direct outcome of all their training, whereas a bodybuilder's training is the direct meaning for their muscular physique, if that makes sense. So the main driver of being a bodybuilder is training to look a certain way. The main driver of being a CrossFit is to train to perform a certain way. And I think that's a clear definition to have with that. But you're so right. You know, CrossFitters do look incredibly good in terms of their physique. But if you actually put them next to a professional bodybuilder, very, very different story. And again, it's horses for courses, isn't it? Your bodybuilder wouldn't do a very good job in a CrossFit competition, but that's not what they're training for. And I think it's important to remember that when you look at CrossFit athletes, and I think a lot of people do this, is they go, oh, I want to look like that, so I'm going to train like that. But these guys are unbelievable. Like, they do a shit ton of volume. They recover incredibly well. And just like a professional bodybuilder, their lives evolve around it. It's not that they go and do a CrossFit class once every few days and eat a bit. You know, it's exactly the same thing.
No, and these guys are elite. You know, they're the best in the world at what they do. No doubt special supplements are involved with it as well. And, you know, it's not going to be just a case of, like, if you see, like with any other athlete, you know, you might see pro athletes playing football and you're like, oh, football looks fun, I'd like to get into that. You don't think, oh, well, I'm going to be going and training with Man United next week. Whereas for some reason with kind of physique sports, people think like, oh, if I get into CrossFit, I'll look like Rich Froning. It's just, you know, you're not just going to rise to the absolute creme de la creme of it and become that world-class level just by dabbling in something in an amateur sort of way. And actually, if you look at that and, like you say, you see that physique and you think, actually, what I want is that sort of level of muscularity, or the way that you're going to get the most bang for your buck then is training and eating like a bodybuilder. That's going to give you your best possible chance of looking like that without having to do everything that, say, Rich Froning does. Whereas if instead you say, hey, I want to perform like that, I think that's really cool, and I want to start going to a CrossFit box and whatever, then sure, have at it, go do CrossFit, but don't expect to get the same sort of outcome as someone who is the best in the world.
Absolutely. So just then, as a kind of final point, to touch on the bit that I kind of brought up in terms of that end part of the session where people maybe aren't maximizing what they could be doing, I think it's important to note that I actually believe it's quite detrimental most of the time to do these quote unquote finishers for two reasons. One, I think it can take away from your session. I think it can diminish the energy that you put in, knowing that you still have to do that at the end. But also, in doing that at the end, if you still have enough energy to do that, that energy, in my opinion, should have been spent in the session. And my third point to that would be, if you still have the energy at the end of the session to do that, have you just wasted a lot of recovery that you could have used for adaptation on the main session? And then that's why I thought kind of mentioning that would be kind of prudent in this instance, because I think a lot of people add, and it's not all about adding. You know, it's about sensibly accumulating volume, and every now and again stripping everything back, starting all over again, and building back up again. It's not just about, can I do 50 exercises today because I did 35 last week, which I think is a misconception based on what we discussed at the very start in terms of the influencer realms of, do this at the end of my session. I'm kind of like, oh, this isn't really helping. Whereas the kind of big and boring style, I think, is far more efficient, far more effective.
Yeah, I've just thought of another one as well that I want to add in.
Oh, we're going for 5. We were at 3. We're going for 5.
Quick one. I think often as well, when I see beginner females going in, I think you can tell when you see a 18, 19, 20, 21-year-old female coming into the gym with a very much like Instagram influenced approach.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't say that as a negative judgment. I think it stands out quite clearly when they're wearing the gear that you see all the influencers wear. They've got the bands that are branded by one of these influencers. They're doing the same sort of exercises that you see and stuff. What I often see these girls do quite a lot as well is try to overly optimize for like specific glute isolation, like specific glute work when they're doing any exercise. So they're not just doing a leg press, they're doing a leg press with only their heels just touching the top of the pad and their feet are absolute legs akimbo on either side of the plate, or when they're doing a Smith machine squat, they've got, again, feet really, really wide apart, toes pointing basically sideways, because all of this is with the thought pattern of like, this is going to be more glutes, this is going to make my glutes grow. But what you have to think with that and strip that back to is if you're doing, let's say, that leg press, and with your crazy legs akimbo stance, you're going to be using 20 kilos added on either side, right? But you're giving yourself another, let's say by some miraculous way we can measure it, and you give yourself an extra 20% of glute engagement, right? You might be therefore making 20 kilos either side actually feel more like 24 kilos either side, right? You've got a 20% bump on that in terms of engagement. If you were then actually just to load up the leg press, right, and just use a slightly wider stance, but you're talking by like a couple of inches, turn the toes just slightly out, but again, just like they're at 10 and 2 on a clock, say, like barely even pointing outwards. And then you can actually load up 40 kilos either side, 60 kilos either side. You're jumping leaps and bounds above where you were even with that extra 20% or so engagement, right? If you're getting a little bit less, but you're able to like double or triple the weight, that's still going to be way more effective for your glutes than just having slightly more engagement, but having to take a huge bath when it comes to the weight that you can use.
It's like the analogy. I think you might have even mentioned this before. It's having a jar and going, right, first I need to put my big rocks in the jar. What are my big rocks? What are the things that are really going to thump my muscles? What can I do a lot of volume with? What can I happily load in a manner that I can then progressively overload well? Then it's about putting the little pebbles in. So the things that maybe are what you could call maybe secondary compound movements. So things that may be more dumbbell based, less barbell, and something which maybe is still quite heavy, still quite taxing, but less taxing than, say, what you would do with a heavy barbell. So that might be your unilateral dumbbell hip thrusts versus your barbell hip thrusts. And then you put the sand in to fill up the jar, and that's your isolation stuff. So I think from the point you were making there, it's important to note that if you're going to do some of the lighter, more activation stuff, that stuff has to come last. That's the sand that fills the jar. That's not the main purpose or point of the plan. So if you were to do, and we discussed this actually a couple of weeks ago, if you were to do a hip thrust, and if you're someone who can hip thrust 200 kilos for sets of 10, I'm going to almost guarantee that you don't have a small set of glutes. I could, if somebody out here is listening to this who has a small set of glutes, you can do 200 kilos for 10 on a hip thrust, please let me know. And the point then is that is the big bulk. That is the main important stuff. It might not seem very exciting, it might not seem very novel, but it is what's important. Then if you want to play around with that kind of leg press with your heels, akimbo, as Jack said, if you watch this on YouTube, you're going to see me start laughing at that point. Then that stuff has to be at the end, but that can't form the main point of your program, because it just...
I wouldn't even include that stuff. I'd disagree full stop on that. I don't think there's any place for something like that in a plan, like the specific stuff I was talking about there. I think like you'd still be way better off getting more bang for your buck with doing movements properly. Like just specifically saying what I was saying on that point of like trying to make every exercise really, really, really glute focused by going super wide stance and toes really pointing out because they heard someone say that that gives you a bit more glute engagement. I wouldn't even call that stuff the sand. I'd say that just doesn't have a place.
No, I agree. I think I was thinking more along the lines of certain exercises which are isolations for the glutes, but not necessarily ridiculous things like that. So where they have, because I think it's important to make a line in the sand almost of like what we think is unnecessary and what is necessary. So I think the definition for this from me, and you can give yours after, it would be helpful. Mine would be, what am I actually getting a mechanical advantage from here? What am I doing that is mechanically enabling me to work the muscle I want to work? And as you said there, Jack, leg press fundamentally is knee flexion. That fundamentally is what we're going through there. And if you're trying to make a knee flexion exercise into a glute focused exercise, it's going to be a struggle. If you're doing ridiculous things like using your heels, because you just can't get as much force, and force is important. Whereas and you might be thinking, well, hang on a minute, I do loads of banded work. Does that count as ridiculous? Well, no, not in my opinion, it doesn't, because that is something which mechanically is there focused for the glute. It doesn't have another string to it. So how would you define that? Just for those who are maybe thinking, well, hang on a minute, what's good in my plan now and what isn't?
It's intention, isn't it? And it comes back to, can you justify those exercises? Doing banded abductions can be effective. Doing a squat and then at the top of every squat, throwing your leg out to the side because you've got a hip circle on is what I'd call, bollocks, quite simply, because you're going to get far more from being able to, what my original point with this whole area was, is that you'll get far more out of just doing proper heavy squats without worrying about flailing your leg out to the left and the right after every rep. You know, so thinking about the intention behind those exercises, again, being able to justify why they are in your plan and what it is that they're actually serving. And if you would try to come back to me and say, well, my abductions at the top of every squat, they have a place because I'm trying to grow my glutes, I would then bring that back round to, you're going to get far more glute engagement if you just triple the weight that you're using and actually go and chuck a barbell on your back rather than doing them with body weight over in the stretching area. And
arguably then do abductions separately, go on a machine.
Exactly.
And I think this is one of my biggest bugbears, and I'm not meaning to bring up point 6 here, but I think it connects well in. The absolute epitome of poor exercises for the glutes has to be Stairmaster kickbacks. They are the bane of my life, because I look at this system, and again, it comes down to intention. What are you trying to do? Are you trying to do some list cardio? Are you trying to grow your glutes? Make a decision and then do one or the other. Because doing 400 reps of kickbacks for half an hour whilst doing your list cardio, it just isn't going to grow your glutes for a start. And it's going to make your list training less than list, because all you're doing is slowing the rate of the Stairmaster down to enable you to do these kickbacks and not fall off the back. Mm-hmm. So it's just like you said with your squat example. Take your two intentions, right? I want to do some lifts and I want to grow my glutes. I'm going to do them separately, because they just don't work together. They are like a terrible pair. And without, as you said earlier, going on a tremendous rant about it, I think that's like the one thing for me, which I think is there's just never a reason for that. Would you agree? Unless you're going to really throw something in the water here.
The main compound exercise that I put in for all my clients is sideways walking on a Stairmaster with a hip circle on and lobbing your leg out to the right every third step. That's the secret ticket, boys and girls.
If you're looking at Jack's glutes on Instagram, you've just had the secret. This is it. That's it. The podcast is now over. Secrets are out.
Don't take our word for it. Pay us, and then we'll give you the secrets.
We'll give you the secret method of the cha-cha slide whilst wearing a bag.
Like on those bad adverts on websites you get, it's like, doctors hate him. You won't believe. Yeah, guys, shit like
what
that.
What websites have you been on, mate?
like Xander said, like if you if you want to be doing cardio, do your cardio. If you want to be building your glutes, build your glutes. They're very separate things. And in a time where everyone is pretty time stricken, there's certainly always vies for our time, vies for our attention. There's always things that you can justify not doing. Everyone's always busy. Get the most bang for your buck from what it is that you're doing. Yeah. And the most bang for your buck with muscle growth is going to be one thing. The most bang for your buck with cardio is going to be another thing. See them for separate constituents as they are, and put your focus into those while you're doing it. Another one is like walking on a really high incline. Didn't I see you write a caption about this actually?
I did, yeah.
Yeah, so like walking on a really high incline, but holding on because they're trying to like go harder and harder and higher and higher. When actually, again, if we bring it back like with my lunge example, if you're actually trying to do that effectively and you kind of strip it back to what do I want to do with this, you want to get the most energy output possible. And by grabbing on, you're going to be massively reducing the energy output and almost making it like you're on a flat anyway. So you'd be getting way more engagement out of going 10, 20, 30% less incline, but not holding on compared to doing it in that sort of way. So try to just call yourself out on your own bullshit, I think is probably a good way to put it, and kind of question in yourself why you're choosing to do that thing. Always come back to, like we say, what is my end goal with this? What is my North Star that I'm actually pointing towards? And how is this helping me get there? Because if you're trying to do too many things at once, it's probably actually not doing either of those things all too effectively.
On that marvelous knowledge bomb, I think we'll call it there. That's fantastic. Great points there, Jack. And something you guys, I think, as a lasting point, would do really well to remember. If you can call yourself out on the shit that you're doing and be honest and open-minded, as we discussed at the start of the podcast, there's not much you can't learn, and there's not much you can't see the bonus of when people are either trying to give you tips and hints, but also when you're looking at your own training program, which is really, really important, because fundamentally it's you that's doing that. It's you that's putting the time into it. And it's your energy as well. Thank you ever so much, Jack. Thank you ever so much for listening, guys, and we'll catch you all next week. Have a great one. Speak soon. Bye for now.
We're going to be adding in a Q&A to the podcast in a few weeks' time. And to do that, we're going to need some questions from you guys. So do go over to our team Instagram page at JLX Coaching on Instagram, of course, and click the link in the bio, and it will take you to a quick Google form where you can fill in any of the questions you've got, and we will get to those in the podcast to come. As for coaching, you can also check the link in our Instagram bio for that, or go to the website, which is at the moment jacklenton.com, and you will see the links to coaching there. Have a good day.